What if I told you that the most dangerous places you will ever visit aren't on any map? They have no addresses, no warning signs, no security guards. Yet they can trap you for years, decades, even a lifetime. I spent 3 years lost in one of these places, convinced I was helping others when I was actually disappearing. And the most terrifying part, I had no idea I was there. Carl Jung discovered that the human psyche creates its own geography, territories of the mind where we wander, sometimes without ever finding our way home. In his work on individuation, Jung warned that before we can become whole, we must navigate what he called the dissolution of the persona, the breaking down of who we think we are to discover who we actually are. But during this journey, there are places the psyche goes that are so seductive, so seemingly safe, that we mistake them for destinations rather than detours. Jung believed that consciousness itself could become monarchic, trapped in rigid patterns that feel like safety but are actually psychological prisons. Today, we're going to explore 6 of these places. Not the dangerous people Jung warned about, but the dangerous territories within your own mind. Places where time stops, where growth ends, where the soul goes to hide from its own potential. Because as Jung discovered through his own psychological descent, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. But first, you have to recognize when you're in the cave. Are you ready to map the dangerous geography of your own psyche? Then follow me into the territories Jung knew could either trap you forever or become the very places where you find your way home. Picture yourself entering a magnificent hall. The walls are mirrors, but these aren't ordinary reflections. Every surface shows you exactly as you want to be seen. Brilliant, understood, validated. And from somewhere in the distance, you hear the sound of approval. Always approval. This is the echo chamber of endless validation. The most seductive prison Jung never explicitly named, but understood perfectly. In his work on psychological types, Jung wrote that the persona is what someone is not, but what he and others think he is. The echo chamber is where the persona goes to hide from growth. You know you're here when every conversation feels like an interview you're acing, when your social media becomes a carefully curated museum of your best self, when you find yourself drawn only to people, books, podcasts that tell you what you already believe. But Jung understood something crucial about validation. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. In the echo chamber, there is no irritation, no friction, no challenge, only the dangerous comfort of being right. The people in this place speak in quotes that sound profound, but say nothing new. They mistake agreement for wisdom. They confuse being heard with being understood. I've watched brilliant minds waste years in this chamber, becoming experts at explaining why they're right, rather than exploring how they might be wrong. Jung believed that true individuation requires what he called the tension of opposites. The echo chamber teaches you to fear this tension, but the gift it's hiding is your capacity for genuine dialogue, the ability to be changed by what you encounter, active imagination, deliberately seeking out perspectives that disturb your comfort. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you cannot become who you are by only hearing echoes of who you think you are. The exit door appears when you ask yourself, when was the last time someone changed my mind about something important? If the answer is, I can't remember, you're deeper in the chamber than you think. But there's another place the psyche goes that's even more dangerous because it feels like healing. You walk through gates that creak with the weight of time. This cemetery holds no bodies, only possibilities. Headstones marking dreams that were buried before they could breathe. Each grave bears an epitaph. Here lies the musician I never became. Here rests the courage I never found. Welcome to the graveyard of unlived dreams. Jung called this psychological territory the unlived life, and he considered it one of the most devastating forms of self-betrayal. In his letters, Jung wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. This place isn't just personal, it's generational. It's where dreams go to become ghosts that haunt families for decades. You know you're here when you catch yourself saying, 'I used to want to,' followed by a reason that sounds responsible but feels hollow. When you scroll through others living the life you abandoned and feel that familiar sting, not quite envy, not quite grief, something colder. The inhabitants of this place are master storytellers of their own limitations. They speak fluently about why things didn't work out, why it's too late, why they're being realistic. They've become archaeologists of their own abandoned selves." But Jung understood something profound about this territory. What you resist persists. The dreams you bury don't decompose, they fossilize. And fossilized dreams become complexes, autonomous parts of the psyche that unconsciously sabotage new possibilities. I've seen people spend decades tending these graves, bringing fresh flowers of regret every anniversary of what might have been. They mistake mourning for healing. They confuse acceptance with abandonment. Jung believed that every complex contains not just wound, but also undeveloped potential. The graveyard teaches you that death is final, but the gift it's hiding is resurrection. The understanding that no dream truly dies, it only transforms. What he called the transcendent function. The ability to hold both the dream and its apparent impossibility in consciousness simultaneously, until a third way emerges. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But sometimes, who you are includes who you never got to become. The exit appears when you stop visiting graves and start planting seeds. When you ask not, 'Why didn't this happen?' but, 'What is this dream trying to become now?' Because there's a place even more treacherous than buried dreams. A place where you're fully alive, but completely hidden." The curtain never falls here. The audience never goes home. Every word is scripted, every gesture rehearsed, every emotion measured for maximum effect. You've forgotten there was ever a time when you weren't performing. This is the theater of perfect performance. Jung called it living entirely within the persona, and he warned it was one of the most sophisticated forms of psychological imprisonment. In The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, Jung wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, a kind of mask designed to make a definite impression upon others, while concealing the true nature of the individual. But in this theater, the mask has become permanent, surgical. You can no longer remove it, because you've forgotten there's a face underneath. You know you're trapped on this stage when vulnerability feels like a costume malfunction. When you rehearse conversations before having them. When your biggest fear isn't failure, it's being seen without your lines memorized. The performers here are virtuosos of appropriateness. They know exactly what to say at funerals, exactly how to act at promotions, exactly which emotions are acceptable in which contexts. They've become living algorithms of social expectation. I've watched people spend entire relationships performing their idea of love rather than feeling it. Careers built on performing competence they've never allowed themselves to develop. Friendships that are actually elaborate collaboration performances where no one is home. Jung understood that this theater creates what he called the provisional life, existing in the waiting room of your own existence, rehearsing for a life that never arrives. The most insidious part? The audience rewards the performance. They applaud the consistency, the reliability, the predictability. They never ask to meet the actor behind the character. Jung believed the persona served a crucial function. It protects the vulnerable self while allowing social connection. The theater teaches you that performance is survival, But the gift it's hiding is authentic presence, the terrifying and liberating experience of being seen without a script, what he called the dissolution of the persona. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial. It means learning to move fluidly between performance and presence. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, but you have to know the difference between who you are and who you perform." The exit door appears when you risk a moment of unscripted truth, when you let someone see you forget your lines, when you discover that authenticity isn't the opposite of performance. It's the choice to perform yourself. But there's a place where people go to avoid even having to perform. You entered this place thinking you were rescuing someone. Now every step you take to help pulls you deeper into emotional soil that isn't yours. You can feel yourself disappearing, but you tell yourself, this is love. This is what good people do. Welcome to the quicksand of others' emotions. Jung warned about this territory when he wrote about what happens when psychological boundaries dissolve, when you become infected by someone else's unconscious. In his work on psychological contagion, Jung observed, the unconscious of one person can completely invade another, without either being aware of the fact. This isn't metaphor. This is literal psychological infiltration. You know you're trapped here when you wake up feeling emotions you can't trace to your own experience. When someone else's anxiety becomes your homework. When you feel guilty for feeling good while they feel bad. When their healing becomes more important than your wholeness. The inhabitants of this place are empaths who forgot they need boundaries, not just sensitivity. Helpers who've become emotionally enmeshed with those they're trying to save. People who've confused absorbing pain with healing it. I've watched extraordinary healers, therapists, and friends disappear into this quicksand, believing that drowning in someone else's darkness somehow brings them light. They mistake emotional fusion for deep connection. They confuse enabling with empowering. Jung understood that this territory creates what he called psychological symbiosis. Two people functioning as one unstable emotional unit. Neither can be healthy while the other remains unwell. Yet neither can heal, because their energy is trapped in maintaining the dysfunction. The most dangerous aspect, the person whose emotions you're carrying, often becomes dependent on your carrying them. You become their external emotional regulation system, and they become your purpose. It's a feedback loop that can last decades. You feel responsible for feelings that aren't yours. You feel selfish for wanting emotional autonomy. You feel cold for needing space to feel your own feelings. Jung believed that true compassion requires what he called holding the tension of the opposites. The quicksand teaches you that love means absorption, but the gift it's hiding is compassionate detachment. The ability to care deeply without becoming emotionally infected. Individuation through conscious relationship. Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation requires two separate substances. If they merge, there's no reaction, only dissolution. The exit appears when you learn to feel with someone without feeling for them. When you discover that the most loving thing you can do is remain yourself while they find themselves. When you understand that emotional boundaries aren't walls, they're the space where real intimacy becomes possible. But there's a place even more treacherous, where emotions don't overwhelm you because you've frozen them entirely. Everything here is perfectly preserved, crystalline, clean, controlled. Emotions trapped in ice like prehistoric insects in amber, visible but unreachable. Intact but lifeless. The temperature is always the same, just cold enough to prevent decay, just warm enough to prevent death. This is the ice cave of frozen feelings. Jung called this psychological territory the provisional life, existing in a state of perpetual postponement of emotional experience. In his exploration of psychological types, Jung wrote, "The stronger the repression, the more explosive the shadow becomes. But in this cave, you've discovered something more sophisticated than repression. Cryogenic preservation. You know you're trapped here, when you pride yourself on never losing control, when you describe traumatic events like you're reading a weather report, when people compliment your strength, but you feel nothing when they say it, when you can analyze your emotions with surgical precision, but cannot feel them with human warmth. The inhabitants of this place are masters of emotional archaeology. They can explain exactly why they feel nothing about their childhood, their divorce, their loneliness. They've become curators of their own emotional museum, everything labeled, cataloged, safely behind glass. I've met people who can tell you the precise psychological mechanism behind their trauma, but cannot tell you how it feels to be them, who know more about attachment theory than attachment itself, who've studied grief instead of grieving. Jung understood that this cave represents a sophisticated defense against what he called the numinous experience. Those moments when the divine, terrifying, transformative power of feeling threatens to overwhelm the ego's need for control. But here's what Jung discovered. Nothing can be healed that isn't first acknowledged. In the ice cave, acknowledgement replaces experience. Understanding substitutes for feeling. Knowledge becomes a beautiful, elaborate way of avoiding wisdom. The most heartbreaking aspect? You can see your emotions perfectly through the ice. They're preserved, complete, waiting. But the temperature required to keep them frozen also makes them untouchable. You feel proud of your emotional stability while starving for emotional nourishment. You feel superior to emotional people while envying their aliveness. You feel safe in your control while dying of emotional hypothermia. Jung believed that feeling and thinking were equally valuable psychological functions. The ice cave teaches you that feeling is dangerous, but the gift it's hiding is integration. The understanding that emotions aren't threats to intelligence, they're intelligence of a different kind. What he called the transcendent function, the ability to allow thinking and feeling to inform each other rather than compete. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." The exit appears when you're willing to let something melt, when you stop studying your pain and start feeling it, when you discover that emotional intelligence isn't managing feelings, it's experiencing them consciously. But of all these dangerous places, there's one final territory that combines elements of them all, a place where you don't just visit, but where you become the architect of psychological prisons for others. You didn't mean to build this place. It started as service, as helping, as being needed. But somewhere along the way, you became the center of a complex emotional ecosystem, where others' energy flows toward you like rivers toward the sea. You've become a factory that processes human attention, care, and emotional labor. This is the factory of emotional extraction. Jung never named this place directly, but he understood its mechanism when he wrote about what happens when the helper becomes psychologically dependent on being needed. In his analysis of the helper archetype, Jung warned, "The good is always the enemy of the better." Sometimes the desire to be good becomes a sophisticated way of avoiding the harder work of being whole. You know you've built this factory when people seek you out for emotional processing, but rarely for joy. When your calendar is full of other people's crises, but empty of your own dreams. When you feel guilty for having needs, because you're supposed to be the one who meets them. When your identity depends on other people's dependence on you. The workers in this factory are unconscious. They don't realize they're feeding a system. They come to you drained. You process their pain. They leave lighter, and you're left holding the residue. They call you strong, wise, helpful. They never ask what you need, because you've taught them you don't need anything. I've watched people build entire careers, relationships, and self-concepts around being the person others turn to in crisis. They mistake being needed for being loved. They confuse emotional labor with emotional intimacy. They become addicted to the feeling of importance that comes from being indispensable. Jung understood this as a shadow expression of what he called the wounded healer. When your own unhealed wounds create an unconscious need to keep others wounded enough to need you. The most insidious part? You genuinely help people. The factory produces real value, but it's powered by your life force, and it never shuts down for maintenance. You feel selfish for wanting reciprocal relationships. You feel guilty for having problems because you're supposed to solve them. You feel empty after giving so much of yourself away, but you don't know how to receive. Jung believed that true healing creates independence, not dependence. The factory teaches you that your value comes from what you give, but the gift it's hiding is sustainable service, the understanding that you can only give from overflow, not from emptiness. Conscious reciprocity. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But being who you are includes being someone who has needs, limits, and the right to receive care. The exit appears when you start teaching people to fish instead of becoming their permanent fish supplier. When you discover that the deepest service comes from modeling wholeness, not managing brokenness. When you realize that boundaries aren't barriers to love, they're what makes sustainable love possible." Have you ever met someone who seemed almost too perfect? They never raised their voice, never lost their temper, always had the right response, the perfect smile, the measured words that made everyone around them feel comfortable. They appeared generous, thoughtful, even spiritually evolved. But something deep in your gut whispered a warning you couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way their eyes didn't quite match their smile, or how conversations with them left you feeling strangely drained, even though they'd been nothing but kind. You walked away confused, questioning your own judgment. Why would you feel uneasy around someone so clearly good? What you experienced was your unconscious mind detecting one of the most dangerous psychological patterns in human nature. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, and what he discovered will fundamentally change how you see the people around you. The person who triggered your unease wasn't just hiding something from you. They were hiding something so completely from themselves that they'd become, in Jung's words, a walking psychological time bomb. Jung identified a specific warning sign that reveals this danger immediately. Most people miss it entirely because it's hidden behind the mask of virtue. But once you learn to recognize it, you will see it everywhere. And more importantly, you'll know exactly when to protect yourself. This isn't about obvious threats like anger or aggression. Those dangers announce themselves. Jung warned us about something far more subtle and infinitely more destructive. A darkness that masquerades as light. A cruelty that wears the face of compassion. A psychological pattern so convincing that its victims often defend their victimizer. The people Jung warned us about don't look dangerous. They look enlightened. They don't act toxic. They act righteous. And that's precisely what makes them the most dangerous individuals you'll ever encounter. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that inexplicable unease you felt was actually your psyche's desperate attempt to protect you from someone who had become completely disconnected from their own shadow. Your intuition was right, and Jung's discovery will show you exactly why you should have trusted it. That inexplicable unease you felt around that perfect person, your unconscious mind was detecting something your conscious mind couldn't name. You were witnessing someone who had become completely split from their own darkness. Carl Jung called this phenomenon the denial of the shadow, and he considered it one of the most dangerous psychological states a human being could reach. To understand why this matters to your safety, you need to understand how Jung saw the human psyche. Every person, Jung observed, wears what he called a persona, a social mask designed to help us function in the world. It's the polite, agreeable, socially acceptable version of ourselves we present to others. But behind that mask lives something Jung called the shadow. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply everything we've learned to reject about ourselves. Our anger, our selfishness, our capacity for cruelty, our forbidden desires. As children, we quickly learn which parts of us are rewarded and which parts get us rejected. So we bury the unacceptable pieces. But here's what Jung discovered that will disturb you. The buried doesn't disappear. It waits. It gathers energy. And when someone spends their entire life denying their shadow exists, something terrifying happens to their psyche that makes them incredibly dangerous to everyone around them. Most people live with some awareness of their darker impulses. They know they're capable of selfishness, anger, or manipulation. And that self-awareness keeps those impulses in check. But the people Jung warned us about have convinced themselves they possess no darkness at all. They believe they are purely good, entirely righteous, completely evolved. They see themselves as incapable of cruelty, manipulation, or selfishness. And this absolute conviction in their own virtue creates what Jung observed to be a psychological time bomb. Because when you refuse to acknowledge your own shadow, it doesn't vanish. Instead, it begins controlling you from behind the scenes in ways that are both subtle and devastating. These people become unconsciously dangerous while maintaining complete conviction in their own goodness. Jung spent decades documenting this pattern. He watched as seemingly virtuous individuals left trails of psychological destruction, all while believing themselves to be helpers, healers, and moral guides. They justified their manipulation as care. They disguised their control as protection. They masked their cruelty as tough love. The most chilling part? They genuinely believed their own justifications. Jung identified specific warning signs that reveal when someone has reached this dangerous state of shadow denial. There's one particular sign, a behavior pattern, so subtle that most people interpret it as evidence of virtue, rather than recognizing it as a red flag. When you learn to spot this sign, you'll understand why your body reacted with alarm to that perfect person's presence. You'll recognize the psychological danger hiding behind their flawless facade. And most importantly, you'll know exactly when to trust your instincts and protect yourself. Because Jung understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. The most dangerous people aren't those who admit their darkness. They're those who have become so convinced of their own light that they've lost all ability to see the shadows they cast. The first warning sign Jung identified is perhaps the most subtle. Absolute moral certainty. These individuals never doubt their own motivations, never question their own righteousness, never admit the possibility that they might be wrong about their moral judgments. Listen carefully to how they speak about themselves and others. You'll notice something chilling. They don't say "I think," or "I believe," or "it seems to me." They speak in absolutes. They are manipulative. "I am only trying to help." Everyone can see how selfish you're being. There's no uncertainty, no humility, no acknowledgement that their perspective might be limited or biased. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his most concerning patients, and he discovered something disturbing. The more certain someone becomes about their own goodness, the more unconsciously cruel they become. But that's not even the most dangerous part of this pattern. Think about the last time you encountered someone like this. Maybe it was a family member who always positioned themselves as the reasonable one, the caring one, the one who only wants what's best for everyone. When you tried to disagree or set a boundary, how did they respond? They didn't get angry. That would reveal their shadow. Instead, they became hurt, disappointed. They spoke to you with the tone of someone explaining basic morality to a confused child. "I'm only saying this because I care about you." Or, "I can't believe you would think that about me. Anyone else would see that I'm right." This is shadow projection in action. Because they cannot acknowledge any darkness within themselves, they must locate it somewhere else. And that somewhere else becomes you, or anyone who challenges their perfect self-image. Jung documented how these individuals create what he called reality distortion fields. They don't just see the world incorrectly, they convince others to see it through their distorted lens. Family members start walking on eggshells. Colleagues begin questioning their own perceptions. Friends find themselves constantly apologizing for imaginary offenses. Here's how to recognize this pattern. Pay attention to how someone responds when you disagree with them or set a boundary. A psychologically healthy person might be disappointed, frustrated, or even hurt, but they'll engage with your perspective. The shadow-denying person will treat your disagreement as evidence of your moral failing. They'll say things like, "I never expected this from you. You're not usually like this. I don't know what's gotten into you lately." Notice how they're not addressing your actual concern. They're questioning your character for having the concern at all. But absolute moral certainty is just the beginning. Jung identified an even more disturbing pattern that often accompanies this first sign, one that reveals just how disconnected these individuals have become from their own psychological reality. The second warning sign Jung identified is what he called emotional perfection. Individuals who have eliminated all traces of human inconsistency from their public presentation. They never seem to have bad days, inappropriate reactions, or moments of genuine vulnerability. This isn't just being well composed or emotionally regulated. This is something far more unsettling. Watch how they move through the world. Their responses are always measured, always appropriate, always just slightly too perfect for the situation. They smile at precisely the right moments. Their voice carries just the right tone of concern when someone shares bad news. Their expressions of sympathy feel rehearsed, like lines from a play they've performed countless times. Jung observed that this kind of emotional perfection isn't control, it's disconnection. These individuals have become so split from their authentic feelings that they can only access scripted emotional responses. But what happens to all those authentic emotions they've buried? Jung's discovery about this will make you understand why your nervous system reacts with alarm. You'll notice this pattern most clearly in crisis situations. While others might show natural stress, confusion, or emotional messiness when facing difficult circumstances, these individuals remain unnaturally calm and composed. They seem to have the perfect response to every tragedy, the ideal advice for every problem, the most spiritually evolved perspective on every conflict. But here's what Jung realized was so disturbing about this pattern. Authentic emotion is unpredictable, messy, sometimes inappropriate. When someone's emotional responses are consistently perfect, they're no longer responding from their genuine self. They're performing from their persona. Think about someone in your life who fits this description. Have you ever seen them genuinely surprised, authentically confused, naturally overwhelmed? Or do their reactions always seem to come from the same calm, composed, slightly superior place? Jung documented how people with this level of emotional disconnection often speak about feelings rather than actually feeling them. They'll say, "I can see you're upset," instead of, "I feel sad for you." They'll observe emotions in others with the detachment of a scientist studying specimens, offering comfort that feels hollow despite being technically correct. The key recognition trigger is this: authentic human emotion includes imperfection, inconsistency, and occasional inappropriateness. When someone's emotional responses are consistently flawless, you're witnessing a persona that has completely overtaken their authentic self. Notice how conversations with them feel. Do you leave feeling truly seen and understood? Or do you feel like you've been speaking to a well-programmed artificial intelligence that knows all the right responses, but lacks genuine connection? This emotional perfection serves a crucial psychological function for these individuals. It protects them from ever having to confront the chaotic feelings they've buried in their shadow. But Jung discovered that this protection comes with a terrifying cost, one that makes them incredibly dangerous to anyone who gets close to them. The terrifying cost, Jung discovered, is this: when someone becomes completely disconnected from their authentic emotions, they lose the ability to take responsibility for the emotional impact they have on others. This leads directly to the third warning sign. They consistently position themselves as the victim of everyone else's unreasonable behavior. Listen to how they tell stories about their relationships and conflicts. There's a disturbing pattern that Jung documented repeatedly. In every narrative, they are the reasonable one who tried to help. Everyone else is ungrateful, oversensitive, or inexplicably hostile. They never seem to consider that their own behavior might have contributed to the conflict. Instead, they express genuine confusion about why people react negatively to them. "I was only trying to help, but she got defensive. I offered some gentle feedback, and he completely overreacted. I don't understand why people get so upset when I'm just being honest." Sound familiar? Jung observed that this pattern reveals something deeply disturbing about their psychological state that goes far beyond simple narcissism. They've become so disconnected from their own shadow that they literally cannot see the manipulative, controlling, or hurtful aspects of their behavior. When others react to these shadow behaviors, they experience genuine shock and hurt, because from their perspective, they were only being helpful, caring, or truthful. This creates what Jung called a reality distortion field. Because they can't acknowledge their own contribution to conflicts, they must construct elaborate explanation for why everyone else is behaving irrationally. And here's the most dangerous part. They often become very skilled at making their version of events sound plausible. They'll describe their constructive criticism without mentioning the contemptuous tone. They'll talk about setting boundaries without acknowledging how those boundaries were weaponized to punish. Or they'll claim they were just being honest while admitting how they used truth as a knife. Watch for this pattern. When someone tells you about their conflicts, notice whether they ever acknowledge their own role in creating the problem. Healthy individuals, even when they feel wronged, can usually identify something they could have done differently. Shadow-denying individuals consistently present themselves as blameless victims of others' inexplicable behavior. Jung observed that these individuals often collect stories of being misunderstood, unappreciated, or mistreated. They become what he called professional victims, not because they consciously manipulate, but because victimhood is the only way their psyche can maintain the fiction of their perfect goodness. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing about this victim pattern. These individuals don't just passively experience themselves as victims. They unconsciously create situations that allow them to feel victimized. It's a psychological mechanism so subtle and so devastating that most people never see it coming. Jung discovered that these individuals unconsciously orchestrate situations that guarantee they'll be disappointed, allowing them to maintain their victim identity while never having to examine their own behavior. They create what he called setup patterns, unconscious arrangements that ensure others will fail to meet their unspoken expectations. Here's how this devastating pattern works. They'll offer to help, but attach conditions they never clearly communicate. They'll give gifts with invisible strings attached. They'll provide support while secretly keeping score of every sacrifice they're making. Then, when others inevitably fail to meet their unstated expectations, they experience genuine hurt and betrayal. But Jung observed something even more disturbing about this pattern. These individuals don't just create setups accidentally. They're unconsciously drawn to people who are guaranteed to disappoint them. It's as if their psyche seeks out confirmation of their victim narrative. And the reason why will shock you. Watch how they choose relationships and situations. They often gravitate toward people with obvious limitations, unresolved issues, or clear emotional unavailability. Then they position themselves as the helper, the supporter, the one who sees the potential in these troubled individuals. When those people inevitably act according to their established patterns, the alcoholic drinks, the narcissist manipulates, the emotionally unavailable person withdraws, these shadow-denying individuals express shock and hurt. After everything I've done for them, I can't believe they would treat me this way. I thought they were different. Jung realized this pattern serves a crucial psychological function. It allows them to feel morally superior while avoiding any real intimacy or vulnerability. They can maintain their identity as the long-suffering helper without ever having to face their own emotional needs or limitations. Notice if someone consistently tells stories about being disappointed by people whose behavior was actually quite predictable. Healthy individuals learn to adjust their expectations based on patterns they observe. Shadow-denying individuals seem perpetually surprised by entirely foreseeable outcomes. They'll complain about their unreliable friend being unreliable again. They'll express hurt that their self-absorbed family member made everything about themselves. They'll feel betrayed that their commitment-phobic partner avoided commitment. The pattern was obvious to everyone except them, or so it seems. Jung understood that this isn't genuine blindness. Deep in their unconscious, they're choosing these situations because disappointment feels safer than success. Being wronged feels more familiar than being loved, and victim narratives feel more comfortable than accountability. This setup pattern reveals something profound about their inner world that Jung considered the most dangerous aspect of their psychology. When someone is this disconnected from their own motivations and needs, they become capable of extraordinary psychological destruction while maintaining complete innocence about their role in creating it. Jung discovered that this level of unconscious destruction stems from a complete split between the persona and the shadow. When someone has pushed all their darkness so far underground that they can't even acknowledge it exists, their shadow begins operating autonomously, creating chaos while their conscious mind maintains complete innocence. Now I'm going to reveal the specific protection Jung developed after decades of observing these patterns. But here's what might surprise you. His protection isn't about defending against others. It's about recognizing these same patterns in yourself before they become dangerous. Remember Jung's most disturbing discovery? The people he warned us about aren't consciously evil. They're unconsciously split. And that split can happen to anyone who refuses to acknowledge their own capacity for darkness. Jung's solution was radical in its simplicity: conscious shadow integration. But this isn't just about personal development. When you learn to recognize and integrate your own shadow, something remarkable happens in your ability to spot these dangerous patterns in others. You develop what Jung called shadow radar, and it will transform every relationship in your life. Here's how Jung's process works. First, you must acknowledge what he called the uncomfortable truth. You are capable of every behavior you judge in others. The manipulation you despise, it lives in your shadow too. The selfishness you condemn, it's part of your human makeup. This isn't about becoming these things. It's about becoming conscious of their potential within you, so they don't control you unconsciously. Jung observed that people who could honestly say, "Yes, I'm capable of manipulation, and I choose not to act on it," were infinitely safer than those who insisted, "I would never manipulate anyone." The first person has a conscious choice. The second person is at the mercy of unconscious impulses they refuse to acknowledge. Start paying attention to your own moral certainties. When you find yourself thinking, "I would never do that," or "I'm not like those people," Jung would say, you found your shadow's hiding place. Whatever you're most righteous about, whatever behavior you judge most harshly in others, that's precisely where your own shadow material lives. Notice when you position yourself as the victim in conflicts. Jung taught that every victim story contains a hidden power story. Ask yourself, how did I participate in creating this situation? What did I do or fail to do that contributed to this outcome? This isn't self-blame. It's self-awareness. Watch for your own setup patterns. Are you unconsciously choosing situations or people that guarantee disappointment? Do you give with strings attached, then feel hurt when those strings aren't acknowledged? Do you help people who haven't asked for help, then resent their lack of gratitude? Jung discovered that once you begin this conscious integration process, something extraordinary happens. You develop immunity to the very patterns that once made you vulnerable. But the transformation goes even deeper than protection. It fundamentally changes how you relate to everyone around you. When you've done the work of acknowledging your own shadow, You develop what Jung called discernment. You can sense unconscious patterns in others because you face those same patterns in yourself. You'll notice that your body responds differently to people now. When someone exhibits those warning signs we discussed, the absolute moral certainty, the emotional perfection, the victim narratives, you'll feel a familiar recognition. Not judgment, but awareness. Remember the most dangerous part of these individuals. They're not consciously choosing to be harmful. They're unconsciously driven by rejected aspects of themselves. Once you understand this, their behavior becomes predictable rather than confusing. When someone insists they're only trying to help while your nervous system screams danger, you'll trust your nervous system. When someone positions themselves as perpetually misunderstood while others around them seem perpetually on edge, you'll recognize the pattern. Those buried, authentic emotions Jung spoke about, when someone has disconnected from them completely, they create an energetic void that sensitive people can feel. Your discomfort around emotionally perfect people isn't you being judgmental. It's you sensing the absence of authentic human connection. Jung's practical protection involves what he called conscious boundaries. Instead of trying to fix, heal, or convince these individuals, you learn to limit your emotional investment. You can be polite without being intimate, kind without being available, respectful without being vulnerable. You stop trying to make sense of their contradictions. You stop explaining yourself when they position your boundaries as attacks. You stop seeking their approval or understanding because you recognize that their reality is fundamentally distorted by their shadow denial. The extraordinary transformation Jung documented is this. When you integrate your own shadow, you stop attracting people who are split from theirs. You become energetically incompatible with unconscious patterns because you're no longer unconscious yourself. You develop what Jung called authentic presence, the ability to be genuinely yourself without needing others to validate or approve of that authenticity. And authentic presence is like sunlight to shadow-denying individuals. They can't maintain their personas around someone who isn't playing the validation game. This is Jung's ultimate insight about the terrifying thing that happens when people deny their shadow. They become dependent on others to carry their projected darkness. But when you refuse to carry what isn't yours, their whole psychological system is forced to reorganize. Some people will do the work of facing their own shadow. Others will simply move on to find someone else who will carry their projections. Either way, you're no longer available for unconscious psychological dynamics. Jung's promise is this: consciousness protects you not by building walls, but by making you unavailable for unconscious manipulation. You become immune to their patterns because you're no longer unconscious of your own. That inexplicable unease you felt around that perfect person at the beginning of this video, now you understand exactly what your unconscious mind was detecting. Someone who had become so split from their own shadow that they'd lost the ability to recognize their impact on others. Jung's warning wasn't about avoiding certain people. It was about understanding the psychological forces that create dangerous unconsciousness in anyone, including yourself. The 4 warning signs we explored: absolute moral certainty, emotional perfection, perpetual victimhood, and unconscious setup patterns. These aren't character defects to judge in others. They're psychological traps that anyone can fall into when they refuse to acknowledge their own capacity for darkness. Jung spent his life studying these patterns because he understood something profound. Consciousness is humanity's greatest protection against unconscious destruction. When you know your own shadow, you can't be manipulated by others who are hiding from theirs. The people Jung warned us about aren't evil, they're unconscious. And unconsciousness, Jung taught us, is the most dangerous state any human being can reach because it removes choice from the equation. When you don't know you're causing harm, you can't choose to stop. But here's Jung's promise. The moment you begin the work of shadow integration, you step out of these unconscious patterns forever. You develop discernment. You trust your instincts. You become unavailable for psychological manipulation because you're no longer unconscious of your own psychological processes. Your nervous system was right to warn you about that perfect person. Your intuition was accurate when it detected something hidden behind their flawless facade. Trust those signals. They're your psyche's way of protecting you from people who have lost the ability to protect you from themselves. Remember, the most dangerous people aren't those who admit their darkness. They're those who have become convinced they have none. But here's something fascinating. Jung discovered that people who deny their shadows often create the most complex, emotionally charged relationship dynamics, especially when unable people become irresistibly attractive. Click the video appearing now to discover Jung's 4 psychological mirrors that reveal why married men pursue other women, and more importantly, what this attraction really means about your own unconscious patterns.